Are you ready? Time to finish this book. Okay, quick summary. Philip and his sister Koch and their dog Frank, who's very naughty, and Peter the rabbit, main characters. When we last read, Peter was dead. Frank had gone out in the rain and brought him home. They washed the rabbit. Not sure what they're going to do. Let's see what happens next. Philip lay awake staring at the ceiling, waiting. He listened to the sounds in the house. His father went into the bathroom. He could hear him brushing his teeth and humming. Then his mother went into the bathroom, and Philip heard them talking and laughing. Then there were the sounds of drawers opening and closing, bed springs sighing, a window opening wider in the hot summer night, and then at last it grew very, very quiet. And Philip kept waiting. The clock in the downstairs hall bonged 12 times. Midnight. He could hear Frank snoring in his sister's room. It wasn't till an hour later, when the clock bonged just once, 1 a.m., that Philip slid carefully out of bed and pulled his high tops over his bare feet. He slipped on his shorts and silently dragged the soft parcel out from under his bed. It was the dead rabbit, wrapped in his father's big bath towel. He held it in both arms and stood motionless in the doorway to his room, listening for sounds in the hall. Nothing. Everyone was asleep. Okay, so here's what I know, my background knowledge. You can get away with things when people are asleep. You shouldn't, but you can. The text evidence said that Philip couldn't wait until everyone was asleep, but he couldn't hear anything. So I'm going to infer he's doing something sneaky. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but he's doing it. Cautiously, he made his way across the hall to the top of the steps. As his foot creaked softly on the first step, "Philip! Shh!" he nearly shouted. Koch's head peeked around her doorway. "Where are you going? What are you going to do?" "Shh," he repeated, this time quietly, as he shook his head and motioned her to follow him. Once they were at the back door, he turned to her. "I'm going to put old Peter here back in his hutch." "Why?" "So he's where he belongs." "But Philip, he's dead." "I know that. And pretty soon old man Hoover's going to know it too. But he's not going to know Frank did it. If he knew, he'd shoot him." "But what if he sees you? What if he catches you? He'll shoot you too." Philip stared through the screen door out to the summer darkness. Kind of like the story Mom used to read us about Peter Rabbit not being allowed to go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Koch's smile flashed in the darkness. "You gonna hide in a watering can?" "Not unless I have to," he answered. "Can I go with you?" she pleaded. "No, you wait here. If you hear any shooting, get Dad." "Oh." But Philip was out the back door before she could say another word. Here's a picture. I know he's outside. I can see the fence. I can see the big old tree. I can see a house. I'm not sure if it's his house or Old Man Hoover's house, but I know that's the dead rabbit. The ground was still wet from the storm, and the maples overhead dripped with tree rain with every soft breeze. Somewhere nearby, a frog was singing in a puddle, and the stars were slowly appearing. Philip crept across his yard to the west fence. In the moonlight, he lowered the clean, towel-wrapped rabbit over the edge of the fence and then hopped over the fence himself. He gathered the rabbit up in his arms again and tiptoed across Old Man Hoover's yard to the hutch. His moon shadow led the way. The old wooden hutch hunkered in the sweet grass in the shadow of the ancient oak tree. Philip was careful to step over a metal pail beside it. Somewhere in the neighborhood, there was a loud sneeze, and then it grew quiet again. Philip laid the dead rabbit gently on the ground and unwrapped the thick towel for a moment. The rabbit glowed clean and white in the night. "Okay, Peter," Philip said quietly, lifting the latch on the hutch. "You go back where you belong and die a peaceful, natural death so Old Man Hoover can find you exactly like this." He lifted the gigantic dead rabbit and pushed it into the hutch off to one side, so its white fur made a little fringe through the metal squares of the chicken wire. Suddenly, a small hand reached out and stroked it. "Cripes!" yelled Philip. Then he whispered, "I thought I told you to stay home." Just like the rabbit, Koch's white gown glowed in the moonlight. Aren't sisters annoying? I'm sure if you have one, you know that. "I just wanted to say goodbye one last time," she said, and dreamily smoothed the rabbit's fur. "He was so beautiful, Philip, wasn't he? Will you please get out of here? You're shining like a light bulb in those pajamas." Koch looked down at herself and then up at the moon, which was wearing a frail rainbow if you didn't look too close. "Nobody here to see," she said. Then suddenly, a few blocks away, over the croaking of the frogs, the volunteer fireman's siren began to wail, louder than seemed necessary, and startled, with cries of terror locked in their throats. Philip Russell and his sister Koch flew wildly to the fence, dove over it into the rain-soaked grass, and hardly breathing tore into the house and up into their rooms. In the darkness, Philip felt his rain-soaked high tops tangle in the sheets and his heart pound in his chest. In the next room, he could hear Koch creeping into her bed, telling Frank to move over, you big galoot." Philip smiled with relief. He was sure Frank was safe now. So my background knowledge is that sometimes people get away with things. And my text evidence is that they left Peter in the hutch, and it says Philip is sure that Frank is safe. So I'm going to infer that old man Hoover is not going to find out. What do you think? For the next couple of days, every time Philip went out the back door, he would look over into the Hoovers' yard, but it was hard to see the hutch. He couldn't tell if the dead rabbit was still there. Surely old man Hoover had found it by now. Surely the danger was over. That weekend there was a craft fair in the meadow beyond old man Hoover's house. Tents and tables and awnings were set up, and beneath them neighbors were selling quilted pillows, carved wooden toys, and little people made out of nails and bolts. The Jenkins family had taken a walk to the fair with Frank at their sides. The hot August sun was beating down hard. "Ma, Dad, look, there's the old Hoovers selling something." Koch pointed to a table and the Hoovers. Old man Hoover was standing there sulking with his hands in his overall pockets, and Mrs. Hoover was sitting in a folding chair shielded from the sun by an umbrella rigged to the chair. "Koch, no," Peter muttered under his breath, pulling Frank's leash tight. But it was too late. "Oh," said his mother, "let's see what they're selling." And she headed straight for their table. "You better watch it, Philip," Koch said, stepping alongside him. "You know what is written all over your face." "How dumb can you get?" Philip said. "I mean, why didn't you just invite old man Hoover to take a look at Frank's mouth for rabbit hairs?" "Oh, stop it. All the rabbit hairs are gone by now." So Mrs. Hoover looked up at the Jenkinses as they approached, and she smiled. "Why, hello, neighbors," she said cheerily. Before her on the table were little doilies in all colors to hang in the windows, to put under bottles of perfume, or to pin to the arms of tiny chairs. But no sooner had they approached the table than old man Hoover hung his head, turned on his heel, and walked quickly away. Okay, here's what I know. It's hard to hide a lie. And my text evidence says that old man Hoover quickly walked away when he saw them. I'm going to infer that old man Hoover figured it out. This could be getting ugly. Uh-oh, thought Philip. He's gone to get his rifle. He pulled Frank to his side protectively and patted his chest. "Oh, don't mind him," Mrs. Hoover said. "He's in a bad way this week, I'm afraid." She looked at Philip and Koch's mother, and bending close over her crocheted doilies, she whispered hoarsely, "Lost his rabbit." "Oh, I'm so sorry," their mother said. "Well, it was bound to happen sooner or later," the old woman said, "but it's just the way that it happened that is so peculiar." Peculiar means strange. Philip looked over his shoulder to see if the old man was coming back with his rifle, but he'd gotten lost in the clusters of people. "Do you remember that bad rainstorm we had a couple nights ago?" Mrs. Hoover continued. "Came down like crazy, drops as big as biscuits." "We were at the movies," Philip's mother answered. "I missed that one, but the kids were home, and the dog. He sure made a mess that night." Philip almost clamped his hand over his mother's mouth, but Mrs. Hoover didn't seem to take much notice. "You see," pay attention here, "you see, right before the rain started, Oscar went out to the rabbit hutch to make sure old Peter was in tight before the storm. and the poor old thing was dead as a post. Old Peter, that is. Philip and Koch stared at each other. So before the rain started, crying like a baby all the while, Oscar dug a hole and buried his old friend. I saw him with my own eyes, or I might have just chalked the whole thing up to Oscar's forgetfulness. She shook her head sadly. What do you mean, their mother asked. Neither Philip nor Koch was breathing. Well, that old rabbit wouldn't stay buried. What? Peter was all ears. Well, after Oscar buried old Peter, and believe me, I saw him with my own eyes right out the kitchen window. He came in and went right to bed. Nothing could bring him down. Not even the honeymooners on TV. Not even a rainbow around the moon. It was as if his heart was broken. They were waiting for the rest. But the next morning, Oscar went out to clean the hutch and tear it down. And don't you know, old Peter was back in it. Clean and dry like he was still living and wouldn't stay dead. He was still dead, all right. So Oscar had to bury him all over again. But we don't know what to make of it. The most peculiar thing. Of course, Oscar won't take down the hutch now, in case Peter comes back, you know. Philip and Koch were grinning at each other, and before they could stop themselves, they began to giggle. Philip, Koch, stop that! Their mother was staring at them in shock, but they couldn't stop. It bubbled up inside them, even with Mrs. Hoover standing there with her mouth open. Without another word, the two of them, with Frank at their heels, took off away from the little table, the craft fair, and the little meadow, and headed back toward home. Once there, they threw themselves on their front porch where the potatoes used to grow, and they rolled around hugging Frank. Their laughter spread up the block like smoke from a summer barbecue, and when the neighbors looked out their window to see what was going on, they could see Philip Russell Jenkins and his sister Koch sprawled on the lawn with their dog Frank. And Frank, true to himself, was lying on his back with all four paws aimed up to the maple trees, where the summer locusts rattled on and on. There they are, playing with Frank. Okay, what just happened? Well, we've said from the very beginning that dogs chase animals, right? And we know that rabbits, I've seen them in my yard. Maybe you have too. Rabbits run loose. The text evidence told me that Mr. Hoover found Peter dead before the rain even started. So that rabbit that Frank brought home, it wasn't Old Man Hoover's dead rabbit. Old Man Hoover had buried his rabbit. And then Old Man Hoover found the rabbit the next day. So, this is my inference. Peter went out. Nope, not Peter, that's the rabbit. Frank went out, found some other rabbit, killed it, brought it home. Philip and Koch thought it was Old Man Hoover's rabbit. They washed him, cleaned him, put him back in the hutch. They had the wrong rabbit all along. What'd you think? Are you surprised? I know I was. I hope I enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this book. I hope you're doing your work. And Miss Hirschberger and I are looking for fun things for the next couple of weeks. So if you're not caught up with your work, do it. See you next week. Have a good weekend.